Our core value at LVMH, the number one core value of the group, is that people make the difference. And we absolutely recognize that nothing that we have today would exist without having, the best, the brightest, the most inspired people at all levels of the organization.
Hello, everyone. It's great to see you all again. I'm Peter Van Ham. You might remember me from last year or the last years. I am, of course, in this case, you know me perhaps as the host of Learning from Leaders, and we're back with a new year of classes, of lectures, of special guests at Learning from Leaders. We start, of course, today with our first online session. It's so great to see everyone, and I hope to hear more from you in the coming hour. But before we hear from you, I'd love to introduce you to our opening speaker of this year, which is Gena Smith. Now, Gena is many things, has done many things in her career, but today she is the Chief HR Officer at LVMH based in New York. Although, Gena, today you're not joining us from New York, are you? Where are you joining us from? And welcome to you.
Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon. It's so wonderful to be with all of you today. Yes, today I am joining you from Santa Barbara, which is my first time here. I'm here for an event, which we might talk about later, but it's actually an event focused on leading for the future and the type of competencies, characteristics that you need, one being empathy as a leader. So I'm going to spend the next 2.5 days, hopefully, learning how to continue to improve even myself as a leader.
That's amazing. And of course, we all want to be learning how to lead for the future. That's pretty much what we're here for. And Gena, we're so honored that you're with us. Of course, you've got an amazing career. We're going to be talking about that. You also work for an amazing company, we should say, which is LVMH. We all know LVMH, of course, especially those of us who are based near some of its key markets, I suppose. LVMH is a French company, isn't it? One of the largest French companies around. Actually, it's one of the largest companies in the world, period. I checked last time. I think the market capitalization of LVMH was around $300 billion. And it has an enormous array of brands. Gena, do you want to, before we get started, you want to maybe just, I suppose most of us know LVMH stands for Louis Vuitton, Moet, Hennessy, fashion, and of course, liquor and high-end drinks. But there's so much more to LVMH than that, isn't there?
Yes, no, you're right. I mean, LVMH is definitely the market leader in the luxury sector. And even more than that, I think that Mr. Arnault, the chairman and CEO, actually, I would say, created the luxury sector, in fact, or at least he globalized the sector. So at LVMH, it's the group, as you said, I think it's still the largest market cap company in France. And we have approximately 213,000 employees around the world.
Wow.
It's an 83 billion euro group. We have over 75 maisons in our group worldwide. We have businesses that are headquartered in, of course, France, in Italy, in North America, in the UK. And we have multiple business sectors across wines and spirits, fashion and leather goods, watches and jewelry, specialty retailing, which is primarily Sephora and DFS, perfumes and cosmetics, of course. We have other businesses as well that we don't speak about as much, including, a yacht company that the group owns. So it's a very diverse and extremely international company representing a number of different business sectors, as you noted.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely amazing. It's dizzying even to just hear you list all the sectors in which you're active, and all the companies, the brands. I think you call them maison, like in French. You call them the houses, the various houses of LVMH. But maybe I want to start, Gena, this conversation by talking about what it is that you do at the company, which is basically you're responsible, I suppose, at the very highest level for all the talent that works at this company. Tell me a little bit about your function as Chief HR Officer. You mentioned more than 200,000 people working for LVMH. I'm sure you're of goodwill. I'm sure you work very hard, but it must be impossible to meet every single one of them, let alone all the people that want to work for LVMH. So what is it actually that you do in your function sitting at the top of that major HR organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because on the one hand, LVMH is a highly complex organization with, as we talked about, tens of thousands of employees around the world. On the other hand, it's still an organization that operates with a very lean mentality. So the philosophy of Mr. Arnault, and I think in the entrepreneur, is that you need to stay very close to the business and you need to stay very close to people. So I have two roles within the organization. I've been at LVMH for 13 years. I oversee human resources for North America, which is predominantly still probably the number one single market in the world. We speak about North America, which is North America, Canada, and the US, but the business is predominantly coming out of the United States.
Sure.
Where we have 43,000 employees. It's a $22 billion region, just this region alone. And we have a number of businesses such as Tiffany, Benefit Cosmetics, Kendo, Fresh, that are actually headquartered in the US. So specifically,
if I can ask you, Gena, sorry to interrupt, but 43,000 people in the US or in North America alone. That's huge, because I associate LVMH with all the French and the European brands, but that must mean that there's a number of companies also in the portfolio that are based in the US. What are some of the names that we would know in terms of LVMH-owned brands in the US?
Well, the biggest one, of course, is Tiffany, that's based here in New York.
The jewelry.
Of course. Benefit Cosmetics, which hopefully some of you know about Benefit, which is based in San Francisco. Kendo is another brand that's based in San Francisco. Kendo was an incubator. It actually came out of the Sephora business. They were responsible for incubating and developing brands. The most successful brand that they've developed is the Fenty beauty brand with Rihanna. That was launched a few years ago, which was really the first time that a beauty brand developed skin product representing multiple skin colors. You would think that it's an obvious, but really nobody was doing anything like that before Kendo and Rihanna came together. And Fresh is another business that's headquartered in New York. It's a global, another skincare and body care brand. Wow. That has large operations in New York and China. China and New York and the US, are the largest markets for Fresh.
That's amazing. And so you're sitting on top of that. Now, you were just explaining to us how you go about that, how you're able to stay agile, even though in your case, you're responsible directly almost for, not managing, but sort of looking at the talent of keeping 43,000 people happy and keeping the company, of course, sort of letting new talent come into the company every year. I suppose that's a few thousand people every single year. So how do you give that direction? How do you do that?
Well, the other part of my role is I oversee executive recruitment worldwide. So I also have a small team in Paris, and I'm usually in Paris every couple of months for a week. I just came back on Friday. I was there for 2 weeks. I report to the global head of HR, and we're part of a very small, I would say, considering the size of LVMH, a relatively small global HR leadership team. And the core focus for us is on talent. It's both protecting the existing talent base that we have, making sure that, to your point, we know, obviously, we're doing it together with the Maisons. I mean, the group has a very decentralized structure. So we have the group, which is where I sit in group HR, as we call it, and we have a fairly decent sized team around the world in all the major regions and then at the headquarters. And then we have each of the Maisons that also have their HR organizations. And we work together to make sure that we know our talent, that we, really look at. We have very rigorous succession planning across the group worldwide, you would hope, with an organization of our size. And every year, we literally go business by business. We start with the business strategy. Where are we today? What are our objectives over the next few years? We look at the individual organizations. We look at the talent, where we have gaps, where we have needs, the caliber of the people that we have in the organization, and really build out our roadmap for the future, meaning, how do we want to invest in building new capabilities and new skills? Where do we invest from a learning and development standpoint? What are the capabilities that maybe we can't develop fast enough, so we need to recruit from the outside? Yep. It could be senior level, it could be mid-level, it could be entry level. But we tried to have really a global perspective across all of the regions, across all of the maisons, working in concert with our brands to understand how we need to prepare and build ourselves for the future. Now, a big focus for us is really putting our talent at the center and making sure that we're continuing to give our talents opportunity for growth, not just in their maison, but across the entire ecosystem of LVMH. We do recruit, thousands of people a year. For the last several years, we've recruited about 60,000 people a year coming into the group. Wow. Part of that is turnover. The majority of our employees around the world work in retail. So in any retail business, you have a fairly high degree of turnover. Sure. But also, we've just had such rapid growth. We literally haven't been able to develop people fast enough to support the growth of the business. So it's a combination of sort of necessity and
it's absolutely fascinating. This number, 60,000 people that join the company every year, and then to hear you talk on the other side of the spectrum about how you really spend a lot of time thinking about how can you develop talent, how can you make sure there's succession, how can you make sure you grow the capabilities in your company. And I suppose that is because at the end of the day, you build brands, you build fashion houses, all these big names. But if you sort of unpack it, it's all about the people.
All about people. Our core value at LVMH, the number one core value of the group, is that people make the difference. And we absolutely recognize that nothing that we have today would exist without having, the best, the brightest, the most inspired people at all levels of the organization. And frankly, I think that's one area where Mr. Arnault has another area where he's always been super advanced and super visionary. He, as much as he always focused on building brand desirability from a customer standpoint, he's also made employer brand desirability a priority because he recognizes, and probably not every CEO unfortunately does, that if we're not desirable to the best talent, again, at all levels, and then now and into the future, that is going to impede our ability to continue being the worldwide leader. Historically, even when I joined the group 13 years ago, it wasn't the objective to speak so much about LVMH. In a way, LVMH was considered sort of the financial holding company of the group. That has changed a lot over the last 13 years. And we recognize that LVMH as an entity is extremely meaningful because what it represents is the richness across the group of so many different sectors and geographies and maisons. And so we are really promoting more and more the idea of LVMH and what all that stands for.
It's amazing because, if you think about the absolute brand power, if you add up all the brand power of all these maisons, probably no one even comes close in the world in terms of the brand power that you have, the sort of the value, the brand value that you have. And then it's interesting that even for a company that has so much brand power, that actually sometimes it can forget about a brand, which in this case was the brand, of course, of the group, and that sort of changed recently. One other thing I want to ask you, Gena, about sort of things that are changing is, of course, your customer group, your employee group, like generations are shifting. We're meeting here, obviously, mostly with people that belong to what's called the Generation Z, Gen Z. How does that change the way you operate as a company? How does that affect LVMH in the most significant ways?
Yeah, I think there are so many ways, both from a customer standpoint in terms of making sure that our brands really resonate with all demographics, and certainly Gen Z, and even thinking about Gen Alpha, who will be entering the workforce and will be engaging with our brands, and frankly already are engaging with our brands through social media. And then, of course, we think about it from an employee standpoint in terms of what Gen Z are prioritizing in terms of the company that they work for. What we saw with the millennial, for example, both on the business side and the employee side, is they were really the first generation, I think, that was calling out on diversity and sustainability. They were very vocal about the importance of these two elements both in terms of where they shopped and where they worked. It's not that other generations didn't care about these things, but I always say that I feel like these generations really gave it a voice. I think with what we see with Gen Z is things like support. You're talking about, at least in North America, we have a lot of conversations around mental health and well-being, the work environment, empathetic leadership. And obviously that's not a surprise because your generation, I mean, I have two Gen Z children and I see what they have gone through during the COVID period and since. So of course you would be more attuned to sort of, this element and how it's impacting you in terms of any of the brands that you want to engage with. I think the other thing that's very unique about Gen Z is that it's the first sort of fully digital generation. So your life has always revolved around a digital platform, and how you engage with brands, either again as an employee or as a customer. For me, what's really important is this idea, my understanding, my belief, and you'll tell me if I'm right or not, you don't necessarily want to be talked at either as an employee. You don't want to necessarily have things imposed on you. You want to be a part of the learning, part of the creative process. You already are engaging in a very creative way with the brands through all of the social media platforms that you use in a way that other generations didn't. You're very involved in sort of this idea of what I call co-creation. So if I look at it from an employee standpoint, and we just had this whole conversation in Paris about this last week, the idea that we as an employers are imposing the way of work and the work environment, it doesn't really make sense. And I think it can be imposed by employees. I think it has to be a model of co-creation. We have to come together to understand what's important to you, what environment is going to allow you to thrive, and how do we find the balance that also allows us as an organization to thrive. So you're bringing this the importance of work environment, of leadership, of again, continuing on with sustainability, DE&I, many of you mentioned it related to the video, and this idea of supporting from a mental health and well-being. These are all the things that I see coming up with the Gen Z.
Maybe one last question is about the corporate culture and how it decides things. And I want to ask you a few more personal questions, if I may, Gena. Where does LVMH land on this whole back to work versus hybrid work debate? Because it seems to me that, to do co-creations on the work floor, to get creativity, it's one of the most obvious places where you actually want to be together in one space. Yet on the other hand, of course, we're meeting here virtually. A lot of us have learned a lot of things virtually by virtue of having gone through COVID in that way. So where does LVMH at the end of the day land on that discussion?
Well, it's not an easy question because, first of all, it does vary by Maison. I mean, again, if you think about the fact that of our 213,000 employees, depending on the market, like in the US, it's like 63% of those employees work in retail. Globally, I think it's around 54, 55%. So, this is the population that they physically have to go into a store in order to do their job. So we've always wanted to be in some sort of solidarity with everyone in retail and not wanting to have a lot of variances between corporate and retail and sort of the work environment. Of course, we want to be reflective of what's happening in the zeitgeist, right? And we need to be if we want to be able to recruit and retain. So in most cases, we do have hybrid working. There are some positions that we believe, like design. It's very hard to do design or anything that's very tactile where you're working with product. To do that virtually, you need to come together as a team. I mean, for us, the creative process, and for most of our creators, I think, they say, and we hear that this idea of being together and creating together is really important. So we try to look at it by function, but each of the Maisons have a degree of autonomy to figure out what makes the most sense for them in terms of a hybrid. Overall, yes, we have a hybrid workforce. I think what's interesting to me is what I have seen is it's not so much the Gen Z that want to work from home. And my experience, at least with Gen Z in North America, a lot of these students really want to be in the office with these employees. They want to be in the office. They want to be with people, maybe 1 or 2 days or having some flexibility. I think it's a little bit of maybe an older generation or a middle generation that maybe you have small children or you have a more complex home situation. So I think we also have to be flexible and adaptable, that it's not a one size fits all. And that's also, by the way, what's difficult as an organization, because you're trying to create some level of equity across a company, but it's not, everybody's situation is unique and important. So we have to sort of look at all of these dimensions, which is exciting and challenging at the same time to do that well.
I appreciate you're so very thoughtful about that. Gena, I want to ask you a couple of more personal questions. Before we get to some questions from students. And by the way, there's students here from all over the world, including from, China all the way to the US and everything in between, and probably even beyond. Now, let's talk a little bit about your international background, because, you're, of course, now Chief HR Officer for LVMH in North America, overseeing this giant group in the US. Were you always international? You're from the US? Or are you from one of those big fashion cities like New York?
No, I mean, I'm not, I wasn't always international. I grew up in a relatively small town in Texas. My father worked in the oil industry, which is a big industry in Texas. So I always joke that we moved around a lot, but it was always in Texas. And it was really during a college experience that I had the opportunity to take a study abroad program in Greece. It was a hotel management program. And I just remember, seeing this sign on the wall, and I didn't necessarily have an interest in hotel management. At that point, I didn't really know what I wanted to do professionally. But I went home and told my mother about this sign. And my mother is somebody that grew up in a very small town in Texas, really had not had many opportunities to leave the United States, but she's an extremely curious person. She's very well read. And so she was so enthusiastic about, we have to find a way for you to be able to have this experience. I know it's going to change your life. And so it was really at her encouragement that I ended up being to Crete for the summer and working at this hotel. And it really did change my life. And I use that as an important inflection point in my life, because it was the first time that I had really been out of my element. I was in a very, very, different sort of environment, different language, different alphabet. I mean, it was really far from what I knew, but yet I never felt more alive, and I never felt more comfortable in a weird way. And I just recognized at that moment that, okay, whatever I did in my life, it needed to have an international dimension. And I didn't know it at the time, but when I look back on it, what I had identified was my love for people and culture. And, I was working there were people from primarily Greece working at the university, at the hotel, but obviously we had customers from all across Europe. And, we did a rotation program around all the different functions. So we got to interact with all the clients, and it was just an incredible experience. So I came back, I changed my major to international business. I ended up going back and studying more in Athens. And then I worked the first part of my career. I was working in international admissions for a university in Athens and in the United States, just because really I knew.
Following that passion of international people that you discovered on that summer in an island in Greece.
Exactly.
And so, Gena, that's amazing, because, of course, you mentioned you come from a relatively small town in Texas. Now, you could have come essentially from any small town in any country, really. What was important for you was to have that person behind you that sort of encouraged you to go out into the world, if that's what you wanted to do. You were able to do that. And from there on, your journey sort of took off internationally. You went to work in Greece. Now you're Chief HR Officer. At the time, you started out in a hotel, then you went to work in a university. At what point did you realize, I want to really work with people, I want to work in HR, that's really my calling?
Well, it's interesting because, between university and LVMH, I spent about 15 years working as a headhunter for, very global search firms, and both large multinational and then a small boutique firm that was hyper-focused on fashion and the luxury sector. And it wasn't so much that I ever thought about HR as a function. I just knew that I had a knack for, helping companies to solve problems, people problems. At the end of the day, you've got a business challenge, and how do we identify an executive or a talent or the right organizational structure to help support that? I loved the fact that I was working with almost exclusively international clients, or, big multinational companies. Like Tiffany was actually one of my biggest clients for a number of years. I knew that, I think what the connection with LVMH, I knew I had interviewed many people at LVMH around the world, and I knew that, number one, the company had an extremely high bar for talent. I knew that it was a company that very much cared about people. And I also saw some of the reasons that people were looking to leave, not necessarily because they were unhappy, but because they didn't know how to navigate the ecosystem or find the different opportunities. And when I was interviewing for the position with the global CHRO, who's my boss, who's been my boss since I joined, she and I just, she's Swiss. She had just been at the company for about 4 years. She came from Nestle. And she really had this vision of really trying to put people at the center. She recognized that we were not doing a good job of managing this incredible ecosystem of talent. And I think we just had a click in terms of what I saw from the outside, what she saw from the outside, and how we might be able to solve it together. Frankly, it was once I came into the role and I started adding these other HR dimensions like learning and development, diversity and inclusion, employee communications. I think that's when I realized, oh yeah, this is the perfect fit for me. HR. It wasn't necessarily by design, but I always followed my passion around people and culture.
I think that's a great practical way to sort of put it like that, right? Which is to say, because we often get this advice from leaders, follow your passion. But obviously you have to be able to put that in practical terms. You have to be able to find a job around your passion. You have to find a passion that actually has careers, that has jobs. And so for you, you say, well, at the end of the day, this is one of the things I recall from talking to you earlier, like a career is a journey, right? And so there's different ways that it can evolve, and you have to be open to that. Gena, I want to, by the way, we've got so many questions in our chat that we could probably keep on talking for 2 hours, but we know that you got to get going to your conference. So I want to bring in a couple of the students that are here with us. I want to start with Lily. Lily, you're based right in Geneva. Maybe we could have met up in person, but you're in Geneva. You're from Germany, and you're studying entrepreneurship and innovation at EU. What question did you have for Gena?
Yeah, so the question that I have for Ms. Smith is, what advice do you have for young professionals who wish to enter the luxury and fashion sector who do not have any direct experience? Specifically, what qualities do you value most in young candidates?
Thanks so much.
Yeah, I think, that's the good news. On the one hand, it's kind of a level playing field because most people don't have any experience. When you're in school, you're just trying to sort of figure out what you want to do. I do go back to identifying what, for me, again, it wasn't that I wanted to be in fashion and luxury. I had a passion for people and culture. And I recognized early on that the companies that were really doing that well were not North American companies, but they were more international companies. And again, I like the fact that they were international. I think with LVMH, what we're always looking for is people that have, definitely the curiosity, the international sensibility. And it could be like myself. Again, I didn't grow up in a very international field, but I was curious, I was interested. I sort of had a natural fit because of curiosity. So for us, how do you make sure that you have those qualities? And then how do you demonstrate those? How are you able, when you're meeting with a luxury brand or a fashion, how can you demonstrate that you actually have those capabilities or those skills around agility, curiosity, international sensitivity? The other thing that's important, we're a very creative industry. So having people that have an affinity or an interest in different types of creativity is really important. So I think trying to understand as much as you can about our group, find the points that really resonate with you, and then how do you associate your personal or professional or academic experiences against those in a way that is compelling and interesting when you have the chance to be in front of a HR representative or a recruiter, or when you're just submitting your references, you need to be able to show concretely like what those capabilities. I think sometimes people focus on, I really love the industry, I'm fascinated with the industry, which is great, but it's not enough. There has to be something more concrete in terms of your, again, personal interest or experiences that really can demonstrate the alignment with our industry.
That's great advice, Gena, because indeed, I suppose many of us love the industry, but I suppose that doesn't make us stand out. It's a necessary requirement perhaps, but not enough, as you said. Thanks. And now, Lily, I hope that helped you as well. I want to move on immediately to Helena. Helena, who actually studies fashion and luxury. So I reckon, Helena, you love the industry, but you did have a very specific question for Gena as well.
Yes, and I just want to say something. For me, it's actually really surreal to be here today because this is my bucket list from when I was 14. So I want to thank you very much for the opportunity. That speaking with you has actually been a dream of mine. And I'm really inspired for somebody whose journey I followed for many, many years. You were definitely a source of my inspiration and joy when I actually needed it the most. And the work has a really positive impact on me and my life. So keep on going. Thank you very much. And also I had many personal accomplishments as well as failures through my life, both of them which have taught me very valuable lessons. So my question for you would be, looking back on your career, was there ever a time when you faced a significant setback or a failure? How did you overcome it? And do you have any learnings so you can share with us?
Thank you. And thank you for your kind words. I appreciate it. I've been working for about 30 years now, which is like kind of scary to say that out loud. And so I have many failures in my career. I think I would have a very boring career, in fact, if I didn't have failures. I think, and I almost prefer to call them, yes, there have been some failures, but I also think about them as more disappointments. Maybe there were positions that I wanted, that I was excited about, that I wasn't able to get for whatever reason. I didn't present myself right in the interview, or I wasn't able to be compelling enough. I think we can all have had those types of experiences. I think back on, when I first took this position, it was the largest team at the time that I had led, and it was the most senior team that I had led. And when I look back on some of my management mistakes, as being a first-time leader of a team of that size and stature, sometimes I'm just like astounded, that I made some of those mistakes. I think what's important is that you actually learn from those mistakes. I've been fortunate to be in environments where risk-taking is encouraged. And anytime you're taking risk or you're pushing the envelope, you're inherently going to make some mistakes because you're testing and trying new things. You need to make sure that you surround yourself by people that you trust, that are going to give you honest and constructive feedback. And if you don't have that, I would really question the kind of leaders that you want to work for. I think we need to know that we have very demanding but safe environments. That's what we try to cultivate at LVMH. But I prefer to think about them as disappointments. And your career will probably have moments where you feel like you haven't lived up to your expectations, or moments that you're disappointed. The important thing is, what do you learn from that? And making sure that you continue to refine your agility so that you can recognize when something is not going the right way and you can quickly change course. But, being humble, asking for help and asking for feedback, these are all strengths. These are things that at any stage of your career, in fact, the more senior you go, the more important that it is actually that you're able to do that, because it becomes more and more complex to navigate the world. And if you're not somebody who's comfortable asking for help or expressing that you feel a little bit, I don't know how to manage this, you're going to have a really hard time continuing to grow and advance in your career.
Gena, thanks so much. And maybe as a quick follow-up, obviously when we start out our careers, our first job or the first couple of jobs, we may not have landed in a spot that has all of that, what you talked about, also in terms of environment and people that we can learn from. If that's the case, would you recommend, if you don't have that nurturing environment or that environment where you can learn and grow, to change?
I would. I mean, it's interesting because very early in my career, when I was working at one of the universities, we had a lot of students that were coming from one region of the world. And there was a big college fair. I had the opportunity to go and visit the students. And I felt that that would increase our ability to secure the students and potentially recruit more students. And I remember going to my boss and telling him that I wanted to go to this college fair. And I remember he said to me, well, that could be very risky. And if you go and it's not a success, you could lose your job. And I said, okay, well, I'm willing to take the risk because I really believed that it was the right thing. And what I realized is that he wasn't willing to take the risk. He was like petrified. And so it was an important moment for me at an early stage in my career to recognize what was important, what kind of leaders that I needed to be around that would be more encouraging, challenging still, but encouraging me. So of course, you can't just quit your job and go, and neither could I at that moment. But it clarified for me another point that I would need to assess when I was looking at a new job. When you're interviewing for a position, don't forget that you're also interviewing them to make sure that it's the right culture for you, it's the right leadership for you, it's the right style, it's the right environment. An interview is not a one-way exchange. It really is a conversation.
Sometimes.
Exactly.
Imagine that imagine they say, oh, I really love, like Helena said, it's been a dream. I really, LVMH, and I'm sure that the dream would live up to the reality would live up to the expectations. But what you're saying is, if it does not live up to your expectations, you have to dare to walk away.
You're still going to learn something from that, and you're going to learn things about yourself. And you sometimes, which is not easy for a lot of us, we know. But I think you have to begin to know yourself and what's important. And yes, when you're in an interview, it doesn't feel that it's a conversation. But whenever they turn it to you and say, what questions do you have? This is when you can start to really dig into what's the culture like here? What is your leadership? The manager that I would be working for, what do they value? What is their leadership? I think even asking your manager, your prospective manager, if I make a mistake, what are the consequences of that? How do you deal with failure in the workplace or mistakes? That gives you a sense of, is this going to be something that's the right environment for you?
I love that. And I think the other thing that it does, Gena, is it probably actually increases rather than reduces your own desirability as an employee, doesn't it? Because people realize, that you're sort of, a person that thinks for themselves and that sort of cares about the environment, etc. Perhaps on that note, I hope I can bring in Ricardo. Ricardo, you're based in Bologna. I love Bologna, great city. You said first university in the world. Glad you chose EU over Bologna. Thank you for that. And you study international business like Gena did. So what's your question for Gena?
Yes, so thank you for the opportunity. I wanted to ask what are the 3 core competencies or skills that you would recommend a young person between 25, 30 to develop if their goal is to move up the corporate ladder? And could you explain also why they would be so important? Just 3 top of your mind.
Thank you.
Well, I think number one, it's agility. And I think we've all experienced, the last few years where you start to realize that the world is a very complex place and navigating from a business standpoint is very challenging. There aren't playbooks that most of us have in terms of how to navigate through periods. So being comfortable with agility for me is key. Empathy, because empathy is important just in terms of a leadership, but I think empathy also keeps you humble and open to constant learning, being curious, understanding how people are feeling, what's happening in the world. And for me, empathy is a performance booster. And finally, I would say decisiveness, because leaders and people need to be able to make decisions. And frankly, you're making decisions with less and less information because of the complexity that we have. So agility, empathy, decisiveness, I think these are 3 absolute core competencies of any successful talent or leader today and into the future.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Gena, there's so many questions still in the chat, but I want to get to Sienna. You've heard Sienna earlier on, like you, she comes from the US, and she, like perhaps some of other of us, are following one of the events that LVMH is currently sponsoring. Sienna.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here today so early. As a communications and PR student, I have to ask you, LVMH has sponsored so many major events this year, such as the America's Cup in Barcelona and then the Olympics and Paralympics in Paris. How do you measure the success of such events?
Thank you.
I think it's complicated, and we're more and more entering into sort of this high performance world of sports and athleticism. You've seen that we've just also launched a partnership with Formula One for the next 10 years. For us, it's about being associated with excellence, I would say. And when you look at something like the Olympics, it's truly about excellence. When you look at Formula One or any of these types of events, you're talking about talent, you're talking about the human component of people, pushing themselves to, the maximum of their limits and beyond. And so in some cases, yes, you're looking at what's the concrete ROI, but in some cases, it's just about making sure that our brand resonate with the type of individual who look to those leading organizations as inspiration, right? Not everything has to be a pure ROI in terms of, we believe, by the way, that there was a significant ROI. You do all the normal things that's, like how many people were searching, how many, more people. We saw, for example, 47% increase in people searching for LVMH after the Olympics, which was pretty amazing because we didn't even have the rights to the Olympics in North America, but it created much more brand awareness and sort of interest, I would say, in, hey, I want to know more about LVMH. So there are all of these sort of KPIs that you can look at around digital and search and all the things that and marketing that you are learned and you become expert at. Of course, you can look at the business impact, although we knew that it wasn't probably going to have the biggest impact on the business in the short term because people would be focused on the Olympics, for example, in France. But in some ways, it's more about that brand adjacency. And because we're the leader in the group, we want to be associated with different important moments in culture and in the world that are different than just sort of the prototypical fashion or beauty types of partnerships that you would have. And again, I think this notion of excellence that you get from these high performance athletes really corresponds. It's one of the other values of LVMH, and it corresponds to the DNA of our group.
Right. That's really insightful. Thank you so much for that, Gena. And then, if I may, I'm going to turn now to a couple of the questions. I can't deal with all of them, but a couple of the questions from the chat. One that has come back for many people. I saw it with somebody who's called Peter as well, somebody who's called Pedro. I don't make this up. These are all people in the group with real names like me, but also Marta and Max. They all ask a question about basically how do you operate as a company while having so many different houses, different maisons? How do you deal with internal competition? How do you deal with allowing for cross-fertilization? And how do you manage talent across all these different maisons?
It's a never-ending challenge. I would say that we actually have very strong KPIs that we measure. So we can tell you every year exactly how many internal mobilities there were at all levels of the organization, how many people were recruited outside the group.
And you would want that. That's a measure of success to say,
yes,
people were able to move from one maison to another. That's good.
Yes, that's very good. It's part of the LVMH promise, I would say. But concretely how it happens, it really requires us as an HR organization and as a business organization, we come together. We have talent discussions at LVMH multiple times a month, okay? And we have different functional community conversations, leadership community conversations. Because we have such a large talent pool, we basically have to segment it in multiple different ways, and we bring together all of the brands. So it's surprisingly very high touch because course, we have technology, and we're implementing more and more technology to help us manage. We're launching a talent marketplace where everybody will have more visibility in terms of all the open roles and being able to apply for positions, identifying where your skills gaps are, what the skills gaps are, what the skills for those positions. But the thing that's very unique about us is we actually spend a lot of time actually meeting our talents. It's not just a theoretical exercise, or it's not just a technology, this person goes here. Because for us, it's not just about John has the right experience to do that job. It's also about making sure that John is fitting with the culture of that maison. That's when we know that John is going to thrive, the business is going to thrive. So it's a combination of technology, it's a combination of like the human piece, and just this being an absolute key priority for LVMH to make sure that we foster an environment of mobility and what we call cross-maison, cross-function, or cross-geography mobility. But I can tell you, it is a tremendous amount of work, as you can imagine.
Yeah,
I think it's a labor of love because there's a lot of passion and support on the topic.
Maybe two final questions before we let you go and start your day. We're going to end our day here, Gena. The first one, I suppose, is, the other question is not to do with the maisons and the diversity of the maisons, but the diversity of your people, the cultural backgrounds of your people. You work in 80 countries, people from all over the world want to work with you. How do you deal with all these different cultures as an employer? And then my second question, that will be my last question, a very practical question. A lot of people here are at the age and at the experience level where they could consider applying for an internship or an entry-level job at LVMH. What are some of the things they can do specifically if you want to stand out in that regard, entry-level job at LVMH or internship?
On the first question, we describe ourselves as a culture that is diverse as a group that's diverse by essence and inclusive by choice. So we really make the decision to welcome diversity. You can have as much diversity as you want, but if you don't create an inclusive environment, it doesn't really matter that you have diversity because it's not going to work. So we spend a lot of time on trying to break down barriers through our ERGs, through all sorts of initiatives. We have an organization,
research groups, so
exactly.
People can get together based on interests and backgrounds.
And we have this around the world. It's an opportunity for anybody to learn, to participate, to hear directly from our different employees on what's important to them. So we try to just make it a priority to educate, inform, and cultivate really an inclusive environment. But again, it's a work in progress, and I don't think you ever say, okay, we're there, we did it. Yeah. It's constantly striving for that. And in terms of, so we have many different internship programs across the group that are done at the maison level. So each of the maisons have their own program. So if you have a specific maison or industry that's interesting for you, I recommend that you go directly to that maison. But we've also we've redone our website, our LVMH website, which is much more concrete in walking you through the internship programs that we have across the maisons on the application process. We also have a program that I would encourage each of you to register if you have it, which is called Inside LVMH. So this is a platform. It's directly focused on next generation talent. We have master classes. We have luxury certificate programs that you can take.
Oh, wow.
We host internships through this platform so you can actually see globally what the different programs are, the different opportunities around the world. So
inside LVMH, we look it up, we'll find it, and actually we can sort of educate ourselves. Probably that way also show that we're good candidates. Gena, I don't know if you have any parting advice. If you don't, because we've come to the top of the hour, you got to go to your conference and we got to, I suppose, now get ready for an apéro or maybe do some homework and studies. One final question. Your favorite designer or favorite celebrity that's teamed up with LVMH? Who is sort of, the most impressive, who's your favorite person that you've met at LVMH because of the fashion or because simply they're just amazing?
It's a very unfair question to ask because, I feel privileged to have so many incredible people. But I guess I would have to say, because I've done more projects with him, it's Jonathan Anderson. He's been an incredible supporter of work that we've done supporting diversity and inclusion. He's hosted a number of different sessions with our employees, with students. He's very giving of himself that way. He's very curious and very open. So probably because I've had the most opportunity to work with him directly, I would have to give him sort of a special recognition because he has really demonstrated he doesn't want to sit in any sort of ivory tower. He really wants to be out there in culture. And I'm so grateful for all of his support that he's given to all of us across many different dimensions.
Well, I think you're now our favorite person at LVMH. I want to thank you for what you've given us today in this hour, answered all of our questions and shared your own testimony, your own journey along the way. So Gena, thank you so much on behalf of all of us. I see a lot of smiling faces. We really appreciated this. We saw that your colleague put in insidellvmh.com. That's where we can go. We'll go and educate ourselves. And of course, Gena, you were opening speaker, keynote speaker of the year. We're going to continue this journey as well this year. We're going to actually have an in-person event next month in Barcelona. You're always welcome, by the way, Gena. This is going to be at the FC Barcelona Stadium. So that's pretty cool as well. And we're going to be welcoming Andre Hoffman. He's the vice chair of Roche. And he and I actually just published a book called The New Nature of Business. November 21st, put it in your calendars. That's when we'll see all of you again. Gena, you're always welcome back. But for now, thank you so much for having joined us and been our opening speaker in this Learning from Leaders.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for having me. Follow me on LinkedIn. I know there were lots of questions. We could never have enough time. So I'm happy to address any questions and help however I can. Definitely Inside LVMH is a great resource. But, thank you all for your time, for being here today, and, for your interest in LVMH. We never take that for granted. We're very grateful to have such incredible talent that's interested in working at LVMH.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Bye.